Between February 14th and 16th, 1989, 14 people were shot dead across Detroit's east side in what would become known as the Linwood Massacre. All adults, all connected to the same drug crew, operating out of a 6-block radius near Linwood Avenue and 7 Mile Road. The method was execution-style shootings, close range, systematic elimination. The perpetrators weren't rival cartels or Colombian suppliers settling debts. They were two brothers, Marcus and Terrence Washington, 28 and 24 years old, moving through their own neighborhood like avenging angels, methodically erasing everyone connected to a betrayal that had cost them $45,000 and shattered a decade of trust. The Detroit Police Department would later classify it as one of the most calculated crew eliminations in the city's history during the crack epidemic. But the motive wasn't a drug war over territory, wasn't retaliation for a shooting, wasn't even about the money that disappeared. It was about loyalty, about a sacred code between men who'd grown up in the same houses, played on the same streets, survived the same impossible odds, and about what happens when that code gets broken by someone you called brother. If you have the courage to hear this story, leave your like and subscribe to the channel. But I warn you, this narrative contains extreme violence based on real events. Detroit's east side sprawled across roughly 40 square miles of urban decay in 1989, home to approximately 200,000 people, most of them African American, most of them watching their world collapse in real time. The area stretched from the city's downtown core out past 7 Mile Road, where the street grid gave way to neighborhoods that had seen better days decades ago. Population density meant houses stood shoulder to shoulder, brick bungalows and wood-frame 2 stories built in the 1920s when Detroit was the arsenal of democracy, when jobs were plentiful and the future looked bright. But 1989 wasn't 1949. The auto plants that had sustained these neighborhoods for generations were shutting down or moving to Mexico. Chrysler's Jefferson Avenue plant had laid off 6,000 workers. GM was hemorrhaging jobs. Ford was automating everything they could. Unemployment in Detroit hit 18% that winter, higher on the east side where the factories had closed first. For black men in their 20s, unemployment was closer to 40%. No jobs, no prospects, no legitimate way to feed a family or maintain dignity in a country that had promised opportunity and delivered abandonment. February in Detroit meant temperatures hovering in the low 20s during the day, dropping to single digits at night when the wind came off the river with a bite that went straight through your coat and settled in your bones. The air smelled like diesel exhaust from DDOT buses, fried food from corner carryouts, and underneath it all, the acrid smell of houses burning, of copper wire being stripped from abandoned buildings, of a city slowly cannibalizing itself for scrap metal. At night, when temperatures really dropped, you could hear the city settling, ice cracking in potholes big enough to swallow a tire, wind rattling through broken windows in empty factories, the distant sound of sirens, constant overlapping, the soundtrack of urban warfare, and gunshots, always gunshots, sometimes close, sometimes blocks away, but always there, reminding everyone that death was just another part of the landscape. But 1989 wasn't just another hard Detroit winter. The city was in the middle of a transformation that nobody wanted, but everyone had to navigate. The crack epidemic that had started in Los Angeles and New York in the early 80s had hit Detroit hard by 87. By 89, it had completely restructured the drug trade, the violence, and the economics of street life. Crack cocaine wasn't like heroin, which had dominated Detroit's drug scene in the 70s. Heroin was expensive, required needleworks, came with a stigma. Crack was cheap, $5 or $10 a rock, instant high, instantly addictive. You could sell it to people who'd never touch powder cocaine or heroin. You could sell it to working people, middle-class people, grandmothers and school teachers, and auto workers who'd lost their jobs and their hope. The market exploded. And where there's money, there's violence. The old drug organizations that had controlled Detroit in the 70s and early 80s, the Young Boys Incorporated, the Chambers Brothers, they'd operated like businesses. Territory, hierarchy, rules. But crack shattered that structure. By 89, Detroit had hundreds of small crews, blocks run by groups of young men who'd grown up together, who defended their corners with automatic weapons, who killed over disrespect as often as they killed over money. Marcus Anthony Washington was 28 years old that February, though people who knew him said he looked older, weathered by years that had demanded too much, too soon. He stood 6 feet 2 inches with a lean, muscular build that came from high school basketball and genetics rather than gym time. His most distinctive feature was a scar that ran from his left temple down to his cheekbone, a souvenir from a bottle that caught him wrong during a fight at Northwestern High School when he was 17. The scar pulled at his eye slightly, gave him a look of permanent skepticism, like he was always questioning whatever you were saying. His hands were large, knuckles scarred from too many fights. A crooked pinky finger on his right hand that had broken and never been set properly. When he shook your hand, you felt the strength there, but also the damage, the evidence of a hard life lived in a hard place. Every morning, Marcus woke at 6:30 in the 2-bedroom apartment he rented on Tyreman Avenue, made coffee in a percolator his mother had given him before she died, and sat at his kitchen table smoking Newports while he planned his day. He didn't talk much in those early hours, just sat, smoked, drank coffee so strong it could strip paint, and thought. By 7:30 he'd be on the street, checking on the spots, making sure his people were where they needed to be, collecting money from the night shift, distributing product for the day shift. He'd married Keisha Johnson in 1985, right after his younger brother Terrence turned 18 and could technically take care of himself. They'd had 2 daughters, Jasmine, 3 years old, and Nicole, 18 months. Keisha was 26 now, worked as a nurse's aide at Detroit Receiving Hospital, 3rd shift, came home exhausted every morning to take care of babies. While Marcus slept a few hours before starting his day, she knew what Marcus did, had known from the beginning. But she also knew there weren't other options, not real ones, not in Detroit in 1989 for a black man with a high school diploma and a criminal record. What Marcus valued most wasn't the money from dealing, though God knew they needed it with 2 babies and Keisha's $40 a day barely covering rent. What he valued was the idea that a man could still protect his own in a world that had taken everything else. His father, James Washington, had been shot and killed on the corner of Mack Avenue and Buick Street in June of 1979 when Marcus was 18 years old. Random violence, wrong place, wrong time, caught in crossfire during a dispute that had nothing to do with him. James Washington had worked at the Chrysler plant on Jefferson Avenue for 22 years, since 1957, when he'd come up from Mississippi at age 19, looking for the good factory jobs he'd heard about. He'd been a good man, everyone said so. Church deacon at Greater Emmanuel Baptist, Little League coach. The kind of father who never missed a parent-teacher conference, who knew his son's friends by name, who believed that education and hard work could overcome anything. He'd survived Mississippi in the 50s, survived Detroit's 67 riots, survived 2 decades of brutal factory work that left his hands scarred and his back permanently damaged. And then he died on a summer night because 2 men he'd never met decided to shoot at each other on a corner he happened to be walking past. Marcus had been there, had watched his father bleed out on hot pavement while people stood around taking pictures instead of calling for help, while the ambulance took 38 minutes to arrive because it was the East Side and East Side calls were always low priority. He'd held his father's hand while James Washington tried to say something, blood filling his mouth, making speech impossible. Whatever final words his father had wanted to share died with him. On that corner, lost in the gurgle of a punctured lung and the indifference of a city that had seen too much death to care about one more body. Marcus's mother, Patricia Washington, never recovered. She'd been a strong woman, worked as a school secretary, kept their house clean, kept her sons in line. But after James died, something broke in her that couldn't be fixed. She started drinking, first wine, then vodka, straight from the bottle. By 1980, she'd lost her job. By 81, she'd lost the house. Marcus was 19, Terrence was 15, and suddenly they were responsible for everything. Patricia moved into a 1-bedroom apartment on Graciette Avenue, a place that smelled like cigarettes and despair. Marcus got his own place, took Terrence with him, became father and brother simultaneously. Their mother died in 1983, liver failure, 41 years old. The only thing she left behind was a shoebox containing their father's personal effects. His wallet with $17 and a union card, his wedding ring, his watch, stopped at 8:47, the exact moment his heart had stopped, and a letter he'd written to his sons years earlier, never sent, found in his locker at the plant after he died. The letter was simple, written on lined paper, in their father's careful handwriting. It said, "Boys, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Remember that being a man isn't about being hard or tough or feared. It's about protecting the people you love, keeping your word, standing up for what's right even when it costs you everything. The world will try to make you into something you're not. Don't let it. Stay true to who you are, to the values I tried to teach you. And remember, loyalty is everything. The people who stand with you when times are hard, those are the only people who matter. Never betray them. Never forget them. and never let anyone hurt them without consequences. As Terrence James Washington, named after his father, was 24 years old that February, though in many ways he'd never really had a chance to grow beyond 15, the age when his father died and his childhood ended. He stood 5 feet 11 inches with a stocky, powerful build from playing defensive back at Cass Tech High School before dropping out in 11th grade. Where Marcus was calculating and controlled, Terrence was emotional, reactive, the kind of man who felt everything intensely and showed it. His face was open, expressive, quick to smile, but quicker to anger. He had their father's eyes, brown and warm, until they weren't, until something triggered the rage that lived just beneath his surface. Every morning, Terrence woke when Marcus called, usually around 7, and met his brother at their primary stash house on Chalmers Street. He'd grab coffee and a honey bun from the corner store, spend the morning making rounds with Marcus, watching, learning, absorbing the lessons his brother taught him about reading people, about when to be generous and when to be firm, about the difference between respect and fear. Terrence had never married, never had kids that he claimed. Though there were rumors of a daughter somewhere on the west side, he tried to join the Army in '84, thought maybe he could escape Detroit, make something of himself, but got rejected for a juvenile record he'd picked up at 16. Aggravated assault. Charges later dropped after the victim decided not to testify, but the military didn't care about dropped charges. The record was enough. Terrence lived alone in a studio apartment on Mack Avenue, a place that was more storage facility than home. He slept there maybe 4 nights a week, spent the rest of his time crashing at one girlfriend's place or another, moving around, staying unpredictable. He drove a 1987 Cadillac Eldorado, gold with white leather interior, the kind of car that announced your presence before you arrived. Marcus had told him it was too flashy, drew too much attention, but Terrence didn't care. The car was the only nice thing he'd ever owned, and he wasn't going to drive some beat-up car just to stay invisible. What Terrence valued most was simple, singular, absolute. His brother. Marcus had raised him, fed him, clothed him when their mother couldn't. Marcus had taught him how to fight, how to hustle, how to survive. Marcus had been father, brother, teacher, friend. Everything Terrence knew about being a man he'd learned from Marcus. Everything he had, Marcus had helped him get. The loyalty between them wasn't just familial, it was existential. Marcus was the only family Terrence had left, the only person in the world he trusted completely. The Linwood crew wasn't a gang in the traditional sense. They were a loose organization of 9 men who'd grown up within 6 blocks of each other, attended Southeastern High School together, survived the economic collapse of Detroit together. No real hierarchy beyond Marcus's quiet authority. No colors or hand signs that meant anything beyond their immediate territory. Just friends, cousins, neighborhood guys who'd known each other since elementary school and who ran a profitable crack cocaine operation out of necessity rather than ambition. Their territory covered 6 blocks of Linwood Avenue between 7 Mile and 8 Mile roads, right in the heart of Detroit's east side. Not prime real estate, not the big money corners downtown, but steady, working-class neighborhood, factory workers who'd lost their jobs, single mothers on welfare, older folks on fixed incomes, young people with no prospects. Everyone needed escape. Everyone needed something to make the days bearable. The Linwood crew supplied that something. Marcus and Terrence controlled the operation, but they relied on 7 others. Raymond Collins, everyone called him Ray Ray, was 30 years old, had known Marcus since they were 12. Tall, charismatic, with a smile that could charm anyone and a head for numbers. That made him invaluable. He handled collections, kept the books, managed the money. Darnell Hughes, 26, was their primary distributor, the one who met with suppliers, negotiated prices, arranged deliveries. Quiet, methodical, never drew attention. Jerome Little, 25, ran their main stash house on Chalmers Street, kept inventory, managed the workers. Kevin Price, 23, was Muscle, the enforcer, 6 feet 4 inches and 240 pounds of intimidation. Antoine Mercer, 27, handled street sales, knew every corner, every customer, every competing crew's movements. Lawrence Jackson, 24, was their driver, owned 3 cars, registered to relatives, moved product and money around the city, and Michael Davis, 22, was their lookout, sat in windows, watched the streets, called warnings when police came through. They'd been working together since '85, 4 years of building trust, building reputation, building something that resembled stability in an unstable world. They weren't making millions. Marcus cleared maybe $3,000 a week, split it with Terrence and Ray Ray, distributed the rest among the crew based on work and need. Enough to pay rent, feed families, buy clothes that weren't from thrift stores, drive cars that didn't break down every week. Enough to feel like men in a world that tried to make them feel like nothing. What held them together wasn't just money. It was history, shared experience, the bond that comes from surviving the same impossible circumstances. They'd seen each other's fathers die or disappear. They'd watched each other's mothers work multiple jobs and still struggle. They'd been to each other's houses for Thanksgiving when there wasn't much to be thankful for. They'd stood up at each other's weddings, held each other's babies, attended each other's relatives' funerals. This wasn't just business. It was family. Chosen family, the only kind that mattered on Detroit's East Side in 1989. Raymond Thomas Collins, Ray Ray to everyone who knew him, was 30 years old that February, the oldest member of the Linwood crew besides Marcus. He stood 6 feet tall with a lean build that came from nervous energy more than exercise. He was always moving, tapping his foot, cracking his knuckles, unable to sit still for more than a few minutes. His most distinctive feature was his voice, deep and smooth, the kind of voice that could sell anything to anyone. He'd been a decent student at Southeastern High, actually graduated in '77, even attended Wayne County Community College for a year, before money ran out and reality set in. His mother, Dorothy Collins, had worked as a nurse at Detroit Receiving Hospital for 32 years before retiring in '87. His father, Raymond Sr., had died of a heart attack in '81, 53 years old, worn out from 3 decades of factory work and the stress of watching Detroit collapse around him. Ray Ray had married Sandra Mitchell in '79, high school sweethearts, had 3 kids, Raymond Jr., 10 years old, Michael, 8, Tanisha, 6. They lived in a small house on Cadillac Boulevard, a place Ray Ray's mother had helped them buy before she retired. Sandra worked as a receptionist at a medical clinic on Jefferson Avenue, brought home $240 a week. Ray told her he worked security at various clubs downtown, which explained the cash, the irregular hours, the fact that he couldn't really talk about work. She believed him, or pretended to believe him, because sometimes not knowing was safer than knowing. What Ray valued most was providing for his family in a way his father never quite managed. Raymond Sr. had worked hard, died tired, left his family with a paid-off house and $17,000 in life insurance that barely covered funeral expenses. Ray wanted more for his kids. Wanted Raymond Jr. to go to college. Wanted Michael to never have to work in a factory. Wanted Tanisha to grow up in a neighborhood where she didn't hear gunshots every night. The money from the Linwood crew was supposed to make that possible. But by February of '89, Ray had a problem. His oldest son, Raymond Jr., had developed severe asthma, needed medication that cost $200 a month without insurance, needed a specialist that cost $300 per visit. His daughter Tanisha needed braces, viz. Another $3,000. His mother's retirement money was running out. She needed help with her mortgage, her medical bills, her daily expenses. Sandra's hours at the clinic had been cut from 40 to 30, dropping their legitimate income by a quarter. Ray was drowning in expenses that his share from the crew couldn't cover. He needed more money, needed it desperately, needed it in ways that made him do things he never thought he'd do. And that desperation, that need to provide, would lead him to make a choice that would cost 14 people their lives. The opportunity came in January of '89 through a connection Ray had cultivated carefully. Detroit's drug trade in the late '80s was controlled by suppliers from Colombia and Mexico, who sold to mid-level distributors, who sold to street crews like the Linwood operation. The standard arrangement was simple. Distributors fronted product to crews on credit, crews paid back after sales, everyone made money. But the markup was significant. A kilo of cocaine that cost distributors $8,000 got sold to crews for $14,000. By the time that kilo became crack and hit the streets, it was worth $40,000. The distributors made their money. The crews made theirs. Everyone survived. But what if you could cut out the middleman? What if you could buy directly from the suppliers, eliminate the distributor's markup, increase profits by 40%? That was the opportunity Ray saw when he met Luis Mendoza in December of '88. Luis was a representative for a Colombian organization operating out of Miami, looking to expand into Detroit, willing to deal directly with established crews who could move significant weight. Ray met him at a bar in Greektown, introduced by a cousin who worked at the port, moving legitimate cargo that sometimes wasn't so legitimate. Luis was professional, careful, didn't promise anything he couldn't deliver. He explained the terms. They'd front 2 kilos on credit, standard price, $8,000 per kilo. If Ray could move it and pay them back within 30 days, they'd continue the relationship. If not, well, Luis didn't have to explain what happened to people who didn't pay Colombian suppliers. Ray saw the potential immediately. 2 kilos from Luis at $16,000 total versus 2 kilos from their current distributor at $28,000. $12,000 in savings. Money that could solve all his problems, catch him up on bills, maybe even put some aside for the future. The problem was Marcus. Marcus had rules, clear rules, never broken. Never deal with anyone the crew hadn't worked with for at least 2 years. Never take product without full payment up front. Never work with out-of-state suppliers who didn't have local references. Never make moves without discussing them with the full crew. Marcus's rules had kept them safe, kept them out of federal investigations, kept them from being robbed or killed by suppliers they didn't know. But Marcus's rules were also conservative, limited their growth, kept them as a small-time operation when they could be something more. So Ray made a decision. He'd take the deal from Luis, move the 2 kilos through his own connections, pay Luis back, pocket the extra profit, and Marcus would never have to know. Just once. Just to catch up on bills. Just to provide for his family the way a man was supposed to provide. It was a simple choice, really, one that made perfect sense in his desperate mind, one that would cost him everything. On February 12th, 89, a Sunday morning when temperatures sat at 19 degrees and ice covered everything, Marcus Washington drove to their primary stash house on Chalmers Street to check inventory before the week started. This was routine, something he did every Sunday at 7 in the morning, before the city woke up, before customers started calling, before the daily grind began. The stash house was a 2-bedroom bungalow, rented under a fake name, utilities paid in cash, nothing traceable. Jerome Little lived there full-time, managed the inventory, kept detailed records of what came in and what went out. Marcus had keys, let himself in through the back door, found Jerome asleep on the couch, television playing some old movie on mute. Marcus didn't wake him, just went to the bedroom they used for storage, pulled up the loose floorboard in the closet, checked the safe they kept. Hidden there, the safe should have contained 3 kilos of uncut cocaine, roughly $200,000 in cash from the previous week's sales, and their backup weapons. Marcus opened the safe, found the weapons, found most of the cash, found only 1 kilo of cocaine. 2 kilos were missing. $45,000 worth of product gone. Marcus stood there, staring at the safe, his mind calculating possibilities. Jerome could have moved it to another location for safety. Someone could have broken in, though there were no signs of forced entry. Or someone in the crew had taken it, stolen it, betrayed them. Marcus woke Jerome, kept his voice calm, asked about the inventory. Jerome sat up, rubbed his eyes, said everything should be there. He'd checked it Friday night before leaving to see his girlfriend. 3 kilos, he was sure of it. Marcus showed him the safe, watched Jerome's face go from confusion to panic. Jerome started talking fast, explaining, justifying, swearing he didn't touch anything, hadn't let anyone in the house except crew members. Marcus made him list everyone who'd been to the house in the past week. Terrence, Ray, Darnell, Antoine, Lawrence. All crew, all trusted, all people who'd had access for years. Marcus called each of them, told them to come to the stash house immediately. Emergency meeting, didn't explain why. They arrived within an hour. Terrence first, then Darnell, Antoine, Lawrence, Kevin, Michael. Everyone except Ray. Marcus called Ray's house, got Sandra on the phone, heard the tension in her voice when she said Ray had left early that morning, didn't say where he was going, should be back soon. Marcus called Ray's pager, entered the code for emergency callback. Waited. No response. Called again. Still nothing. Marcus looked at his brother, saw Terrence's face hardening, saw him reaching the same conclusion. Ray Ray had the missing cocaine. Ray Ray was avoiding them. Ray Ray had betrayed the crew, violated the sacred trust that held everything together. The realization settled over Marcus like ice water, cold and clarifying. 10 years of friendship, 10 years of working together, 10 years of trust, shattered by greed or desperation or whatever, had motivated Ray Ray to steal from his own people. Marcus finally reached Ray Ray at 2 in the afternoon. Ray Ray's voice on the phone was casual, unconcerned, said he'd been running errands, battery died on his pager. What was the emergency? Marcus kept his voice flat, emotionless, said they needed to meet, discuss some business, nothing serious. Ray Ray suggested Gus's Coney Island on Gratiot Avenue, public place, neutral ground, 3 o'clock. Marcus agreed, hung up, looked at Terrence. His brother's hands were clenched into fists, knuckles white, breathing hard through his nose. Marcus put a hand on Terrence's shoulder, said they'd handle this clean, get the truth first, make decisions after. Terrence nodded but didn't unclench his fists. They arrived at Gus's at 2:45, took a booth in the back where they could see the door, ordered coffee they didn't drink. Ray Ray walked in at 3 exactly, smiled when he saw them, that easy, charismatic smile that had charmed everyone for 30 years. He slid into the booth across from them, ordered a coney dog and fries, acted like nothing was wrong. Marcus waited until Ray Ray's food arrived, until he'd taken a bite, until his guard was down. Then Marcus said it plain, simple, direct. 2 kilos are missing from the safe. Ray Ray stopped chewing, face frozen, fork halfway to his mouth. He set the fork down slowly, wiped his mouth with a napkin, his hands shaking just slightly, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. Marcus was looking for it. Ray Ray started talking, words coming fast, defensive, explanatory. He'd borrowed the product, was going to pay it back, had an opportunity to make money for everyone, wasn't stealing, would never steal from the crew. Marcus listened, face showing nothing, let Ray Ray talk himself into a corner. Terrence leaned forward, voice low and dangerous, asked how Ray Ray planned to pay back $45,000 when his share from the crew barely covered his expenses. Ray Ray's eyes shifted, looking at Terrence, then Marcus, then at the door, calculating escape routes, realizing there weren't any. He admitted it then, voice dropping, losing the charm, becoming honest for maybe the first time in months. He'd made a deal with a new supplier, Colombian connection, thought he could make extra money, pay back the fronted product before anyone noticed, keep the profits to cover his son's medical bills, his daughter's braces, his mother's expenses. He'd moved the 2 kilos through his own connections, made the sales, cleared $60,000. But the Colombian supplier wanted their money back immediately, wouldn't wait for the 30-day terms they'd originally agreed to, threatened his family if he didn't pay within the week. So Ray Ray had taken money from the crew's safe, paid the Colombians, planned to replace everything before the Sunday inventory check. He just needed a few more days, would make it right, swore on his kids' lives he'd make it right. Marcus sat there, absorbing this, processing the betrayal in layers. Ray hadn't just stolen product. He'd made deals without crew approval, worked with unknown suppliers, risked everyone's safety for personal profit, then stolen cash to cover his mistakes. Every rule Marcus had established, every boundary that kept them safe, Ray had violated. Terrence started to stand up, hand moving toward his waistband where Marcus knew he kept a 9mm Glock. Marcus grabbed his brother's arm, held him in place, shook his head once. Not here. Not in public. Not where witnesses could identify them later. Ray saw the movement, understood what it meant, his face going pale. He started talking again. Faster now. Desperate. Promising he'd get the money back, had some collections coming in, could have everything replaced by next week, just needed time. Marcus stood up, dropped a $20 bill on the table for the coffee they hadn't drunk, looked at Ray with something colder than anger, something closer to disappointment that cut deeper than rage. "You broke the code," Marcus said quietly. "And that's something we can't fix with money." Ray opened his mouth to respond, but Marcus was already walking away, Terrence following behind, both brothers leaving the Coney Island without looking back, leaving Ray sitting alone at a booth, staring at food he could no longer eat, understanding with terrible clarity what was coming next. Marcus and Terrence drove back to the stash house on Chalmers Street in silence, the kind of silence that comes when words seem insufficient for what needs to be communicated. The afternoon light was fading, turning the sky that particular shade of gray that meant more snow was coming. They pulled into the driveway, sat in the car for a moment, engine idling, heat blowing. Neither of them ready to move yet. Finally, Terrence spoke, voice tight with controlled rage. "We can't let this go." Marcus stared through the windshield at nothing in particular, his mind already working through scenarios, calculating consequences, weighing options that all ended badly. "I know," he said quietly. "We let Ray slide, we lose everything. Every crew in Detroit will hear about it. They'll know we're soft, know they can steal from us, betray us, face no consequences. We'll be done inside a month." They went inside, found the rest of the crew waiting. Tension thick enough to choke on. Marcus told them what Ray had admitted. Watched their faces process the betrayal, the anger building, the sense of violation, spreading through the room like poison. These weren't violent men by nature, weren't killers, weren't gangsters in the way movies portrayed gangsters. They were neighborhood guys who'd chosen an illegal path because legal paths led nowhere, who'd built something together based on trust and mutual survival. Ray's betrayal wasn't just about money or product. It was about breaking the only thing that held them together in a world designed to tear them apart. Darnell Hughes spoke first, voice flat and certain. "Ray has to go. Can't be in the crew anymore. We cut him loose, let him know he's out, take back whatever money he's got. Call it done." Kevin Price shook his head, massive shoulders tense. "That's not enough. He stole from us, lied to us, put us all at risk with his Colombian connection. Cutting him loose lets him walk away clean, maybe even talk to police to avoid charges if the Colombians come back on him. We can't let him walk." Antoine Mercer, usually quiet, usually the one who avoided conflict, said what everyone was thinking, but nobody wanted to say out loud. He knows too much. Knows our suppliers, our customers, our stash locations, our methods. He walks away angry. He becomes a liability. Federal agents would love a witness like Ray, someone on the inside who can give them everything. Marcus listened to his crew, to men he'd worked with for 4 years, hearing them talk about killing someone they'd known for decades like they were discussing a business decision, which, in a way, they were. This was business, street business, governed by codes that had nothing to do with legal systems, but everything to do with survival. Terrence stood up, paced to the window, looked out at the darkening street. It's not just Ray. He's got people who helped him move that product, people who bought it, people who know he made deals behind our backs. Those people talk. Word spreads. The Colombians hear about our operation. They come looking to expand their territory. We got to send a message that's so clear, so final. Nobody ever thinks about crossing us again. Marcus knew his brother was right, knew they'd already crossed into territory where there was no turning back. The moment Ray stole that cocaine, the moment he violated the crew's trust, he'd set events in motion that had their own inevitable logic. Mountain justice, street justice, the old codes that governed places where law didn't reach, they all said the same thing. Betrayal demands blood. Not because people are evil, but because trust is the only currency that matters when you're operating outside legal protection. Break that trust and the entire system collapses. Marcus pulled out a notebook, the same kind his father had used to track work schedules at the Chrysler plant, started writing names. Ray Collins at the top, then below that, everyone connected to Ray's side operation. Darnell Hughes had done some asking around, calling in favors, finding out who Ray had been working with. The list grew. Ray's cousin, Marcus Jenkins, who'd introduced him to the Colombian supplier. 2 of Ray's childhood friends, Leon Carter and Dwayne Thomas, who'd helped distribute the stolen cocaine. Jerome Hamilton, who ran a competing crew on Harper Avenue and had bought half a kilo from Ray. 4 street dealers who'd worked directly with Ray on the side deal. 3 more people who'd helped package the product. 14 names total. 14 people who knew about Ray's betrayal, who'd benefited from it, who represented witnesses to what he'd done. Marcus looked at the list, felt the weight of it, understood what they were about to do. This wasn't going to be a simple elimination, wasn't going to be quick or clean. This was going to be a massacre, systematic and complete, designed to erase every trace of Ray's side operation and send a message that would echo through Detroit's streets for years. Terrence looked over his brother's shoulder at the list, pointed at some of the names. Half these people ain't even involved directly. They just worked for Ray. Didn't know about the theft. Marcus nodded, slowly. But they know about his Colombian connection. Know he was moving weight independently. Know too much. We let any of them live. We're just giving police future witnesses. It has to be everyone. The crew went silent, the reality settling over them. They were talking about killing 14 people, most of whom they knew personally, some of whom had families, children, lives that would be shattered. But the alternative was worse. The alternative was losing everything they'd built, becoming targets themselves, watching the crew disintegrate under the weight of unpunished betrayal. Marcus pulled out a city map, started marking locations where each person on the list could be found. Ray Ray's house on Cadillac Boulevard, Marcus Jenkins' apartment on McDougal, Leon and Dwayne's place on Mack Avenue, Jerome Hamilton's operation on Harper, the street dealer's usual corners. 3 days, Marcus said quietly. We do this over 3 days, move fast, hit everyone before word spreads, before people can run or hide or call police. Valentine's Day, 89, 3 in the morning, when the city was as quiet as Detroit ever got. Temperature had dropped to 12 degrees, streets empty, except for occasional police cruisers and the truly desperate, still looking for another hit to make it through the night. Marcus and Terrence sat in Marcus's 1984 Chevy Caprice, dark blue, unremarkable, parked 2 blocks from Ray Collins's house on Cadillac Boulevard. They'd been sitting there for 45 minutes, watching, making sure no neighbors were awake, no police were patrolling, no unexpected complications. Marcus had brought 2 9mm handguns, both equipped with homemade suppressors that wouldn't completely silence the shots, but would muffle them enough that they might not wake neighbors. Terrence had a 12-gauge shotgun, sawed off, loaded with double-aught buckshot, backup in case things went wrong, in case they needed overwhelming force. They'd both taken something to steady their nerves, not drugs, just whiskey. A few shots each to quiet the voices that said they were about to cross a line no human being should cross. Marcus kept thinking about Ray's kids. Raymond Jr., 10 years old, who played basketball, who wanted to be an engineer. Michael, 8, who collected comic books. Tanisha, 6, who still believed in Santa Claus and Easter Bunny. By sunrise, those kids would be orphans. Their father's body cooling on his bedroom floor, their lives destroyed before they were old enough to understand why. Marcus pushed the thoughts away, focused on his own daughters, on what would happen to them if he let this betrayal stand, if he showed weakness, if other crews decided the Linwood operation was vulnerable. Protection requires hard choices. His father's letter had said loyalty was everything, that you never let anyone hurt your people without consequences. This was consequences. They moved at 3:15, walked through backyards, avoiding streetlights, staying in shadows. Ray's house was dark except for a porch light left on, probably for security, though security meant nothing against what was coming. Marcus tried the back door, found it unlocked. Detroit people still didn't lock doors, even in neighborhoods where they should. They moved through the kitchen. Familiar layout. Marcus had been here dozens of times for barbecues and birthday parties and Sunday dinners. The normalcy of it made what they were about to do seem impossible, surreal, like they were moving through someone else's nightmare. Ray's bedroom was on the first floor, door closed. Marcus could hear snoring from inside, deep and steady. Sandra would be in there too, Ray's wife of 10 years, innocent in all of this, asleep next to a man who'd signed his own death warrant through greed and desperation. Marcus looked at Terrence, whispered the plan again. Quick, clean. Ray only, get out fast. Terrence nodded, face set, jaw clenched. Marcus opened the bedroom door slowly, inch by inch, thanking God it didn't squeak. The room smelled like sleep and perfume, and the particular warmth of two people sharing a bed. Ray Ray was on the left side, Sandra on the right, both under thick blankets against the February cold. Marcus moved to Ray Ray's side, gun raised, aimed at his head from 2 feet away. Ray Ray's eyes opened, some sixth sense warning him even in sleep. He saw Marcus, saw the gun, understanding flooding his face with terrible clarity. He opened his mouth to speak, maybe to plead, maybe to ask why, maybe to say goodbye to his wife sleeping beside him. Marcus fired twice, both shots to the head, the suppressor reducing the sound to sharp coughs rather than explosive bangs. Ray Ray's body jerked once, then went still. Sandra woke instantly, sat up, saw her husband's blood spreading across the pillow, saw Marcus and Terrence in her bedroom, understood in that moment that her life had just ended even though she was still breathing. She opened her mouth to scream. Terrence moved faster than Marcus thought possible, hand over her mouth, pushing her back down, whispering frantically, "We're not going to hurt you. Stay quiet. Stay still. Don't look at him. Just stay quiet." And we're gone. Sandra froze, eyes wide with terror, tears streaming down her face, nodding against Terrence's hand. Marcus grabbed his brother's shoulder, pulled him away. They left Sandra there, sitting in bed next to her dead husband, left her to call police or not call police, left her to explain or not explain, left her alive because she was innocent, and because even monsters have limits. They were in the car and moving within 90 seconds, adrenaline making everything sharp and clear and impossibly fast. Terrence was shaking, hands trembling on the shotgun. Marcus drove carefully, exactly the speed limit, nothing to draw attention. They had 2 more stops before sunrise. Marcus Jenkins lived in an apartment on McDougal, 3rd floor of a building that should have been condemned years ago. He was Ray Ray's cousin, 32 years old, the one who'd introduced Ray Ray to the Colombian supplier, the one who'd helped move the stolen cocaine through his connections at the port. Marcus and Terrence climbed the stairs, found Jenkins's apartment door secured with a flimsy chain lock. Marcus kicked it once, hard, and the chain tore out of the doorframe with a sound like a gunshot. Jenkins was in the living room, asleep on a couch, television playing infomercials, empty beer bottles on the floor. He woke to Marcus standing over him, gun pointed at his face. "Wait," Jenkins said, hands up. "Wait, I can explain." Marcus didn't wait, didn't want to hear explanations. 2 shots, center mass. Jenkins slumped sideways on the couch, blood soaking into cushions that had seen too much life and now witnessed death. They were back in the car, driving toward Mack Avenue, toward Leon Carter and Dwayne Thomas's place, before Jenkins's neighbors could process the sound and decide whether or not to call police. Leon Carter and Dwayne Thomas shared a rental house on Mack Avenue near Alter Road, right on the border between Detroit and the Grosse Pointe, where wealth and poverty existed side by side, separated by nothing but city limits and decades of segregation. Both men were in their mid-20s, had grown up with Ray Ray, helped him distribute the stolen cocaine through their street connections. They weren't major players, weren't dangerous, just neighborhood hustlers trying to make money in a city that offered no other options. Marcus and Terrence arrived at 4:30 in the morning, Sky still dark, but lightening at the edges. First hint of dawn beginning to show. The house was dark, quiet, a single car in the driveway, lights off. Marcus felt exhaustion settling into his bones, the adrenaline from the first 3 killings wearing off, leaving behind something hollow and sick. But they'd started this, crossed the line, and the only way forward was through. They approached the house, found the front door locked, moved around to the back, found a window left open despite the February cold. Marcus climbed through, Terrence following, both of them moving through a kitchen that smelled like old grease and garbage that needed to be taken out. Voices from upstairs, muffled, 2 men talking quietly, words indistinct, but tone casual, relaxed, unaware. Marcus and Terrence climbed the stairs, each step creaking, announcing their presence to anyone listening. The voices stopped. A bedroom door opened. Leon Carter stepped out, wearing boxers and a t-shirt, squinting in the darkness. "Who's there?" Marcus raised his gun, fired 3 times. Center mass, professional, methodical. Leon fell backward, hit the door frame, slid down to the floor. Dwayne Thomas appeared in the doorway behind where Leon had been standing, saw his friend dead, saw Marcus and Terrence, understood too slowly what was happening. He turned to run, nowhere to go, trapped in a second-floor bedroom. Terrence fired the shotgun, the sound massive in the enclosed space, despite the sawed-off barrel. Pellets, catching Dwayne in the back, slamming him forward into a wall. He collapsed, tried to crawl, leaving a blood trail on carpet that had been beige once. Marcus walked over, finished it with 2 shots to the head. Mercy, if there was such a thing in what they were doing. They left through the front door, past a neighbor's house where lights were coming on, someone calling out, asking what was that noise, was everything okay? Marcus and Terrence walked calmly to their car, didn't run. Running would draw attention. They drove away as sirens started in the distance. Police responding to multiple gunshot reports across the east side, trying to figure out if they were connected or just another Tuesday night in Detroit. Next stop was Jerome Hamilton's operation on Harper Avenue. Different kind of target, different kind of risk. Jerome ran a competing crew, sold crack on corners that bordered Linwood territory, had bought product from Ray Ray during his side operation. Taking out Jerome meant crossing into territory they didn't control, risking retaliation from his crew, escalating this from internal business to external war. But Jerome knew too much, had seen Ray Ray's Colombian connection, firsthand represented a witness who could connect them to the original theft if police started investigating. Marcus and Terrence arrived at Harper Avenue at 5:45, sky getting lighter, early morning workers starting to appear on streets, buses running their first routes. Jerome's crew ran out of a storefront that pretended to be a barbershop but hadn't cut hair in 3 years. They knew Jerome usually slept in a back room, didn't go home most nights, stayed close to his product and his money. Marcus parked around the corner, engine running, ready for quick escape. Terrence went in alone, shotgun under his coat, walking casual, just another customer looking for an early morning pickup. He knocked on the barbershop door, called out that he needed to see Jerome, had money for a re-up. Movement inside, locks disengaging, door opening. Jerome stood there, 30 years old, short and heavy, wearing sweatpants and a Detroit Pistons jersey. His face showed confusion when he saw Terrence, not recognition of immediate danger, not understanding yet what this visit meant. Terrence didn't wait for understanding, pulled the shotgun, shoved Jerome backward into the shop, fired twice before Jerome could reach for the gun. Everyone knew he kept behind the barber chair. The sound echoed through the empty storefront, massive and unmistakable. No way to hide what had just happened. Terrence turned and ran, sprinted back to the car, dove into the passenger seat. Marcus accelerated smoothly, not squealing tires, not drawing more attention than the gunshots had already drawn, just moving, purposefully, away from a scene that would be swarming with police within minutes. They had 8 more names on the list, 8 more people who needed to die before word spread, before the remaining targets could hide or run or call police for protection. Marcus pulled over on a side street, sat there breathing hard, hands shaking on the steering wheel. The sun was coming up over Detroit, light breaking through clouds, another day beginning for people who had no idea that 6 men had been killed in the past 3 hours. Terrence reloaded the shotgun with shells from his pocket, movements mechanical, face blank, gone somewhere inside himself where emotion couldn't reach. Marcus looked at his brother, saw him disappearing into the violence, becoming something they couldn't come back from. "We stop here," Marcus said quietly. "We've sent the message. Everyone knows by now what happens when you cross us." Terrence turned to look at his brother, eyes cold and empty. "We stop here. 8 people still breathing who can testify, who can tell police everything, who can put us away for life. We finish this or we die trying, but we don't stop halfway." Marcus knew his brother was right. Knew stopping now meant all of this had been for nothing, meant those 6 deaths were just murder without purpose. He started the car, pulled back onto the street, drove toward the next address on the list, toward 4 street dealers who worked on corners near Grand River and Warren, who'd helped Ray move his stolen product, who had no idea what was coming for them in the bright light of Valentine's Day morning. By 8 in the morning on February 14th, Detroit police had 7 crime scenes, 6 bodies, and no clear connection between them, except geography and timing. The east side was flooding with patrol cars, detectives, forensics teams, trying to process multiple homicides simultaneously while more calls kept coming in. The city's murder rate was already among the highest in the nation. But this was different. This was systematic. This had the feel of a gang war or cartel hit, something bigger than the usual beefs over corners and disrespect. Captain Richard Foster of Detroit's 5th Precinct stood in Jerome Hamilton's barbershop at 7:15, looking at a body cooling on the floor, listening to witnesses describe a black male, mid-20s, average height, carrying a shotgun under his coat. The description matched approximately 40,000 men in Detroit. Foster called for backup units, told his sergeants to flood the east side, stop and question anyone suspicious, lock down the neighborhood before more bodies showed up. But it was too late. Marcus and Terrence were already moving, already ahead of police response, already hitting their next targets before law enforcement could connect the pattern. The 4 street dealers worked different corners but lived in the same apartment complex on Grand River, a 4-story building that had been Section 8 housing before the government cut funding. Now it was just low-income housing where landlords took cash and didn't ask questions about where it came from. Marcus and Terrence split up for efficiency, Terrence taking the second floor, Marcus taking the third. They moved fast, knocked on doors, forced entry when nobody answered, found their targets still sleeping or just waking up, confused and slow to react. Terrence found Malik Stevens in apartment 204, 23 years old, sat up in bed when he heard the door crash open, saw the shotgun, started to say something. Terrence fired once, center mass, the blast massive in the small apartment, then moved to the next unit. Carlos Mitchell in 206, 25, tried to run for his bathroom window, 3 stories up but desperate, anything to escape what was happening. Terrence caught him in the hallway, put 2 rounds in his back, left him face down on carpet that had absorbed too much violence over the years. Marcus found Deshaun Porter in 303, 22 years old, standing in his kitchen making coffee, radio playing soft R&B, completely unaware that 6 people had already died that morning. Marcus walked in, gun raised, watched Deshaun turn, see him, drop the coffee mug, ceramic shattering on linoleum. Porter's hands went up automatically, muscle memory from previous police encounters, instinct that said surrendering might save him. But this wasn't police, wasn't arrest, wasn't anything that ended with him alive. Marcus fired 4 times, professional grouping, center mass. Deshaun fell backward against his refrigerator, slid down to the floor, leaving a red smear on white enamel. The last dealer was Antonio Richards, apartment 308, 26 years old, and he'd heard the gunshots, heard the screaming, was trying to climb out his window onto a fire escape when Marcus kicked his door open. Antonio looked back, saw Marcus, made a choice. He jumped 3 stories down to an alley, landed wrong, shattered his ankle, but alive. Crawling toward the street, toward potential witnesses, toward anything that might save him. Marcus walked down the stairs calmly, exited through a side door, found Antonio 50 feet from the building, still crawling, leaving a blood trail from where broken bone had torn through skin. Marcus stood over him, looked down at a young man who'd made the mistake of taking money from Ray Collins, who'd done nothing more than try to survive in a city that made survival nearly impossible. "Any last words?" Marcus asked. Not mockery, genuine question, offering what little mercy he could. Antonio looked up, tears streaming down his face, said, "Tell my mama I love her." Marcus nodded, fired twice, ended it quickly because drawing it out served no purpose beyond cruelty. They were back in the car. By 8:35, 10 names crossed off the list, 4 remaining. But the last 4 were going to be harder. Word had spread through Detroit's streets faster than police could respond. Cellular phones and pagers carrying warnings, dealers and hustlers calling each other with fragments of information. The Washington brothers killing everyone connected to Ray. Stay away from anyone who worked with Ray. Hide if you can. run if you can't. The remaining 4 people on Marcus's list knew they were targets, would be barricaded or gone, would have called police or other crews for protection, would not be sleeping peacefully, waiting for death to knock. Marcus and Terrence sat in the car 3 blocks from where they'd killed Antonio Richards, police sirens converging on the area, helicopters starting to circle overhead, the city's response finally catching up to the violence. Terrence looked at his brother, face exhausted, eyes hollow. "We finish it today?" Marcus shook his head. "We lay low for 24 hours. Let them think we're done. Let the last 4 relax their guard. Then tomorrow night we finish it. Tomorrow night, everyone who knows about Ray Ray's betrayal is dead, and this is over. We can go back to our lives. Back to the crew. Back to normal." Terrence laughed, sharp and bitter. "You think there's normal after this? You think we go back to anything?" Marcus didn't answer. Just started the car, drove toward his apartment, toward a few hours of sleep before they had to finish what they'd started, before they had to kill 4 more people and complete the massacre that had begun with Valentine's Day morning, and a betrayal over $45,000 and 2 kilos of cocaine that seemed meaningless, now compared to the blood they'd spilled to avenge it. By the afternoon of February 15th, Detroit police had identified 10 victims across 7 crime scenes, all killed within a 6-hour window on Valentine's Day morning. The media descended on the east side like vultures. News vans parked on corners where yellow tape fluttered in the winter wind. Reporters doing live shots in front of houses where families had been destroyed. Channel 7 called it the Valentine's Day Massacre, a reference to Chicago's infamous mob killing 60 years earlier. Channel 4 went with gang war erupts on East Side. Channel 2, always more restrained, simply reported multiple homicides under investigation. But the coverage did what coverage always does. It spread fear, spread information, and spread warnings to anyone who might be next on the list. The investigation was being led by Detective Lieutenant Marcus Green of the Detroit Police Homicide Division, a 23-year veteran who'd seen more death than most soldiers, who'd worked the crack epidemic's worst years, who thought nothing could surprise him anymore. He stood in the 5th Precinct conference room on the morning of February 16th, looking at crime scene photos spread across 3 tables, trying to find connections that weren't immediately obvious. 10 victims, all male, all African American, ages 22 to 32, all with criminal records related to drug distribution. All killed execution style. Most shot multiple times at close range. Several killed in their homes while sleeping or just waking. This wasn't random violence. This was systematic elimination, someone working through a list, someone with training or natural talent for killing efficiently. Green had seen professional hits before. Mob enforcers from the Giacalone family. Contract killers from the Curry organization. This had that same feel. Purposeful, methodical, emotionless. The break came from Sandra Collins, Ray Ray's widow, who'd sat in silence for 18 hours after watching her husband die, before finally calling police at 9 in the evening on Valentine's Day. She'd been terrified, convinced that talking to police would get her killed too, would make her children targets, would accomplish nothing except putting her family in more danger. But the news coverage had shown her the scale of what was happening, had shown her that this wasn't going to stop, that more people were going to die unless someone talked. She called Detective Green directly, said she had information about the Valentine's Day killings, needed protection for herself and her children, needed guarantees that she wouldn't be charged as an accessory for not calling immediately. Green arranged for protective custody, moved Sandra and her 3 kids to an undisclosed location, sat down with her in an interview room at 5th Precinct with a tape recorder running and a female detective present to help keep her calm. Sandra told them everything. Told them about Ray's side operation with the Colombian supplier, about the stolen cocaine, about Marcus Washington discovering the theft on February 12th, about the confrontation at Gus's Coney Island. She described how Marcus and Terrence Washington had come to her house at 3 in the morning on February 14th, how she'd woken to gunshots, how they'd left her alive after killing her husband in the bed beside her. She gave them names, addresses, details about the Linwood Cruise operation, everything she knew from 10 years of being married to Ray Collins. Detective Green listened, taking notes, his mind already working through probable cause for arrest warrants, search warrants, surveillance operations. He had 2 suspects now, Marcus and Terrence Washington, brothers, both with criminal records, both known associates of Raymond Collins. He had motive, means, and opportunity. He had a witness who could place them at one of the murder scenes. What he didn't have was physical evidence, fingerprints, ballistics matches, DNA. Without that, Sandra's testimony alone might not be enough to convict, especially with a good defense attorney. Arguing she was traumatized, unreliable, had reasons to lie. Green ordered surveillance on Marcus Washington's apartment on Tyerman Avenue and Terrence Washington's studio on Mack Avenue. He sent units to known Linwood crew locations, stash houses, corners where they operated, looking for the brothers, looking for witnesses, looking for anything that could build a case strong enough to bring federal charges, because this wasn't just 10 murders anymore. This was continuing criminal enterprise. This was organized crime. This was exactly the kind of case that could bring in FBI and DEA and turn a local investigation into a federal racketeering prosecution. But Marcus and Terrence had disappeared. They weren't at their apartments, weren't at known crew locations, weren't anywhere police could find them. Green put out a bolo, be on the lookout, distributed photos to patrol units across the city, sent descriptions to neighboring jurisdictions in case the brothers had fled to suburbs or across state lines. All he could do now was wait, watch, and hope that Marcus Washington made a mistake before 4 more people died. The remaining 4 people on Marcus's list had gone to ground. 2 had left Detroit entirely, drove to family in Ohio and Indiana, planned to stay away until they heard the Washington brothers were dead or arrested. 1 had checked himself into Detroit Receiving Hospital, claiming chest pains, figuring police presence and security cameras made it the safest place he could be. The last one, Vincent Shaw, 30 years old, had made a different choice. He'd gone to Jerome Hamilton's crew, the same organization Marcus had hit 2 days earlier, offered them information about the Washington brothers in exchange for protection. Jerome's second in command, a man named Curtis Wade, saw opportunity. The Washington brothers had killed his boss, had disrespected his crew, had shown that East Side operations weren't safe from violence. Protecting Vincent Shaw meant protecting their reputation, meant showing that Jerome Hamilton's crew couldn't be pushed around, even after their leader's death. Curtis gathered 8 men, armed them with everything from 9mm handguns to an AK-47 someone had bought from a National Guard armory theft, fortified a house on Harper Avenue, and waited for the Washington brothers to come finish their list. Marcus and Terrence had spent 36 hours in a motel room on 8 Mile Road, just inside Detroit's city limits, paying cash, using fake names, watching local news coverage that made them sound like monsters, like terrorists, like something inhuman and unstoppable. The coverage didn't mention Ray Ray's betrayal, didn't mention the stolen cocaine, didn't provide context that might make viewers understand why this had happened. It just showed grieving families, shocked neighbors, politicians calling for justice, police promising arrests. Marcus watched his daughters on television, Jasmine and Nicole, being led out of their apartment by social services workers, while Keisha stood on the porch, crying, screaming at reporters, saying her husband wasn't a monster, wasn't what they were portraying, was just protecting what was his. Marcus wanted to call her, wanted to hear her voice, wanted to tell his daughters he loved them and would come home soon. But he couldn't. Phones were traceable. Any contact would lead police straight to them. Terrence hadn't spoken much since the killings on Valentine's Day morning. He sat on the motel bed, cleaning guns, loading magazines, preparing for the final 4 eliminations like he was preparing for war. Marcus could see his brother disappearing further into something dark and unreachable, could see the violence changing him in ways that might be permanent, might destroy whatever humanity they had left. Marcus had killed 10 people in 6 hours, had looked into their faces as they died, had heard their last words and pleas and prayers. He'd done what he believed was necessary, what the code demanded, what protecting his legacy and his crew required. But necessity didn't make it easier to live with, didn't stop the faces from appearing every time he closed his eyes, didn't quiet the voice in his head that sounded like his father asking if this was really what being a man meant, if protecting what's yours required destroying everything else. They left the motel at 9:30 on the evening of February 16th, drove toward Harper Avenue, where they knew Vincent Shaw was hiding with Jerome Hamilton's remaining crew. This was going to be different from the Valentine's Day hits. This was going to be defended, fortified, prepared for their arrival. This was going to be a firefight, not an execution, and the chances of both brothers walking away were slim. Marcus had made peace with that. If they died tonight finishing what they'd started, at least they'd die together, at least they'd die for something they believed in, at least their deaths would mean something to the people who came after them. Better to die standing up than live on your knees. His father's words, twisted now to justify violence his father would have condemned. They parked 3 blocks from the Harper Avenue house, loaded their weapons in the car, checked magazines and chambers, made sure everything was ready. Marcus had brought the 9mm handguns, plus a .38 caliber revolver as backup. Terrence had the shotgun and a MAC-10 submachine gun he'd acquired from somewhere, probably stolen from a gun store or bought off someone who'd stolen it. 45 rounds in the MAC-10's extended magazine, enough to lay down suppressive fire, enough to cut through doors and walls and anyone standing behind them. They approached the house at 10:15, saw lights on inside, saw shadows moving behind curtains, saw a man standing guard on the porch with something that looked like a rifle. This wasn't going to work the way Valentine's Day had worked. They couldn't sneak in, couldn't surprise anyone, couldn't rely on targets being asleep or unaware. This was going to be loud, violent, and over quickly, one way or another. Marcus looked at his brother, saw Terrence's face set in grim determination, saw him ready to die if dying meant completing their mission. Marcus grabbed his brother's shoulder, pulled him close, spoke quietly. If this goes bad, if I go down, you run. Get out of Detroit. Go to Atlanta where Mom's sister lives. Start over. Don't throw your life away trying to save me. Terrence shook his head. We started this together. We finish it together. Neither one of us leaves the other behind. That's not how we do things. That's not who we are. Marcus wanted to argue, wanted to make Terrence promise to survive, wanted to protect his baby brother the way he'd been protecting him since their father died 16 years ago. But there wasn't time, and Terrence wouldn't have listened anyway. The bond between them was absolute, unbreakable, the only thing in their lives that had never wavered or failed. They were going to live together or die together, but they weren't going to be separated. They moved toward the house, no stealth, no pretense, just walking straight up the street with weapons visible announcing their presence, daring Jerome's crew to come out and face them. The guard on the porch saw them first, raised his rifle, shouted something Marcus couldn't hear over the wind. Marcus raised his 9mm, fired 3 times, watched the guard stumble backward, fall against the porch railing, drop his weapon. The front door burst open. 4 men spilling out with guns, firing wildly. Shots going everywhere, adrenaline and fear making them inaccurate. Terrence opened up with the MAC-10, sweeping fire across the porch, full automatic, bullets chewing through wood and brick and flesh. 2 more men went down. The others scrambled back inside, slamming the door, returning fire through windows. Glass shattered, muzzle flashes, lighting up the darkness. The sound, like the end of the world, concentrated in one small residential block. Marcus and Terrence took cover behind a car, parked on the street, bullets punching through doors and windows, engine block stopping most rounds, but some getting through. Marcus felt something hot slice across his left arm, looked down, saw blood soaking through his jacket, realized he'd been shot, not bad, just a graze, but enough to remind him how quickly this could go wrong. Sirens in the distance, multiple units responding to reports of automatic weapons fire, helicopters probably already being scrambled. They had maybe 3 minutes before police arrived in force, maybe 5 minutes before SWAT units surrounded the area. Not enough time to clear the house. Not enough time to confirm Vincent Shaw was dead. Not enough time to finish what they'd started. Marcus looked at Terrence, saw his brother reloading the MAC-10, preparing to charge the house, preparing to die trying to complete their mission. Marcus grabbed him, pulled him back, shouted to be heard over the continuing gunfire. "We're done. We gotta go. Now!" Terrence tried to pull away, tried to keep fighting, but Marcus was stronger, dragged him toward their car, parked 3 blocks away. They ran through backyards, jumping fences, staying low, putting distance between themselves and the Harper Avenue war zone. Behind them, police units were arriving, officers taking positions, ordering everyone inside the house to come out with hands up, preparing for a siege that Marcus and Terrence would not be part of. They reached their car, got in, drove away calmly, just another vehicle on 8 Mile Road, nothing to distinguish them from thousands of other cars. Terrence was crying, silent tears running down his face, not from fear, but from failure, from leaving the job unfinished, from not completing what they'd promised to complete. Marcus drove toward the only place left for them to go, the only place that made sense as an ending to what they'd started. Their mother's house on Gratiot Avenue, the place where she died 6 years earlier, the place where they'd become orphans together, the place where this had really begun long before Ray Collins stole 2 kilos of cocaine. For 2 weeks, Marcus and Terrence Washington were the most wanted men in Detroit. Their photos were on every news broadcast, every newspaper front page, featured on Crime Stoppers with a $20,000 reward for information leading to their arrest. Federal authorities had taken over the investigation, FBI agents working alongside Detroit police, DEA agents tracking potential drug connections, U.S. Marshals coordinating with law enforcement across multiple states. The city was gripped by fear and fascination. People arguing in barbershops and churches about whether the Washington brothers were heroes or monsters, whether Raymond Collins had deserved what happened, whether there was any justification for killing 14 people over money and pride. Some people, mostly those who'd lived the street life, who understood codes that governed places where law didn't reach, expressed a certain respect for the brothers. They'd been betrayed. They'd responded according to rules. Everyone in that world understood. They'd sent a message that would keep other crews from trying similar moves for years to come. Others, mostly those who'd lost family members in the massacre or who worked in law enforcement or community organizations trying to reduce violence, saw the Washington brothers as exactly what was wrong with Detroit, exactly why the city was dying, proof that some people valued revenge more than human life. The remaining 4 targets on Marcus's list had survived. Vincent Shaw had been in the Harper Avenue house during the firefight, had hidden in a basement while bullets flew upstairs, had been arrested by police, along with 8 other men, when they finally surrendered after 3 hours of negotiation. He'd immediately asked for a lawyer and protective custody, had offered to testify against the Washington brothers in exchange for reduced charges on weapons possession. The 2 men who'd fled to Ohio and Indiana had eventually come back to Detroit, figured the brothers were either dead or far away by now, tried to resume their lives with extra caution. The man who'd checked into Detroit Receiving Hospital had stayed for 5 days before doctors said they couldn't keep him any longer, had been placed in witness protection by federal authorities who wanted to preserve potential testimony. The Washington brothers' crew had disintegrated. Darnell Hughes, Kevin Price, Antoine Mercer, Lawrence Jackson, and Michael Davis had all been arrested on various charges. All were sitting in Wayne County Jail waiting for trial. All were maintaining silence about the brothers' whereabouts. Some because of loyalty, some because of fear, some because They genuinely didn't know where Marcus and Terrence had gone. Marcus and Terrence had spent those 2 weeks moving between abandoned houses across Detroit's east side, places they'd known since childhood, places where police wouldn't think to look because they appeared too obvious. They'd survived on fast food, bought with cash from gas stations, on bottled water and chips and whatever they could steal from corner stores during early morning hours when only one clerk was working. They'd watched their money run out, watched their options narrow, watched the city close in around them like a trap they'd built themselves. Terrence wanted to run, wanted to steal a car and drive to Mexico or Canada, wanted to disappear and start over somewhere police wouldn't find them. But Marcus knew running was pointless. Their faces were everywhere, their names were known. They'd left too many witnesses, too much evidence, too clear a trail. Running would just delay the inevitable, would end with them dead in a shootout on some highway or arrested in some random traffic stop. They'd done what they'd set out to do, most of it anyway, close enough that the message was clear. Ray Collins and 13 others connected to his betrayal were dead. The Linwood crew's reputation was established forever. No one would ever steal from them again, because there was no them anymore. Just two brothers on the run, and a legend that would outlive them both. On March 1st, Marcus called Keisha from a payphone outside a gas station on Gracieott Avenue. He knew police were monitoring her phone, knew they'd trace the call, knew he only had maybe 90 seconds before units were dispatched to his location. He told her he loved her, told her to take care of their daughters, told her he was sorry for destroying everything, but he'd do it again because loyalty demanded it, and a man without loyalty was no man at all. Keisha begged him to turn himself in, promised she'd support him through trial, promised she'd bring the girls to visit him in prison, promised she'd wait, however long it took. Marcus told her not to wait, told her to move on, find someone who could be there for her and the girls, someone who hadn't killed 14 people and thrown away any chance at normal life. He hung up while she was still talking, walked away from the payphone as police cars arrived 3 minutes later, lights flashing, officers securing the area too late to catch anyone. That night, Marcus and Terrence broke into their mother's abandoned house on Gracieott Avenue, the place where she'd died alone and drunk while they were out trying to make money to save her. The house had been empty since '83, 6 years of decay and neglect, broken windows covered with plywood, holes in the roof, floors rotting through. But it was theirs. It was home. It was where everything had started to go wrong and where everything would end. They spent the night in their old bedroom, sitting on a floor too damaged to hold furniture, talking about childhood before their father died, before their mother fell apart, before they became what they'd become. Terrence asked Marcus if he thought they'd done the right thing, if the 14 deaths had been worth it, if their father would have understood. Marcus didn't have an answer, couldn't say yes, but couldn't say no either. They'd followed the code, protected what was theirs, sent the message. But the cost had been everything. Their freedom, their families, their futures, their souls, if such things existed. At dawn on March 2nd, they called Detroit police from a payphone 3 blocks from the house, told them they were ready to surrender, gave them the address, asked for Detective Green. specifically because they'd heard he was fair, didn't beat suspects, treated everyone with at least minimal respect. Then they went back to the house, sat on the front porch with their hands visible, no weapons, waiting for what came next. Police units arrived within 8 minutes. Dozens of cars, SWAT team, FBI agents, news helicopters overhead filming everything. Officers approached with guns drawn, shouting commands, ordering the brothers to lie face down on the porch. Marcus and Terrence complied, let themselves be handcuffed, let themselves be searched and photographed, and read their rights. Detective Green arrived 30 minutes later, looked at the two men who'd killed 14 people, over 2 kilos of cocaine, and $45,000. Saw them not as monsters but as what they were. Two brothers who'd valued loyalty more than life, who'd followed an ancient code to its inevitable conclusion, who'd destroyed themselves in the process of protecting something that couldn't be protected because violence never protects anything. It only destroys. Marcus Anthony Washington was tried in Wayne County Circuit Court on 14 counts of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and continuing criminal enterprise. The trial lasted 6 weeks in the fall of 1989. Sandra Collins testified, her voice breaking as she described watching her husband die. 3 members of the Linwood crew testified under immunity deals, describing the organization's structure and the brothers' roles. Ballistics experts matched bullets recovered from crime scenes to weapons found in the brothers' possession at surrender. The defense argued that Ray Collins's betrayal had provoked the violence, that street codes demanded response, that the brothers were products of a system that had failed them at every level. The jury deliberated for 11 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Marcus Washington was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole, to be served at Michigan's maximum security facility in Jackson. Terrence James Washington received the same sentence. They were separated immediately after sentencing, sent to different facilities under orders that they have no contact, that their bond be broken as punishment for the bond that had led to massacre. Marcus served 34 years at various Michigan prisons, transferred multiple times due to conflicts with other inmates, time in solitary confinement for refusing to cooperate with prison gang recruitment. He took college courses through a correspondence program, earned an associate's degree in sociology, wrote letters to his daughters that went mostly unanswered. Jasmine, his oldest, visited him 3 times in 34 years, each visit tense and painful, father and daughter, separated by glass and phones and decades of absence. She told him on her last visit in 2018 that she'd changed her last name, didn't want to be associated with what he'd done, didn't want her children to know their grandfather was the Marcus Washington from the Valentine's Day Massacre. Nicole never visited at all. Wrote him 1 letter when she turned 18, saying she forgave him but couldn't have him in her life, hoped he found peace, but she needed to find hers first. Keisha divorced him in 1992, remarried in 95 to a teacher who raised Marcus's daughters as his own. She never visited the prison, never wrote, made a clean break that Marcus understood and respected. His daughters needed a father who was present, and Marcus was gone, locked away forever, for choices he still believed were necessary, even though they'd cost him everything. Terrence lasted 8 years before the violence finally consumed him completely. He was killed in a prison riot at Ionia Correctional Facility in May of 1997, stabbed 14 times by members of a gang whose leader Terrence had disrespected over something trivial. Some comment about the food or someone's shoes, the kind of thing that meant nothing outside prison walls, but meant everything inside, where respect was the only currency that mattered. Marcus learned about his brother's death 3 days after it happened, sitting in a Jackson prison cell, reading a letter from a prison chaplain who thought notification should come from a person rather than a form. Marcus didn't cry, didn't rage, didn't react in any visible way. He just sat there, staring at the letter, understanding that the last person who'd truly known him, truly understood him, truly shared his history and his burdens was gone. He'd protected Terrence from the world for 24 years, raised him after their father died, taught him everything he knew, and ultimately, he'd led him into violence that had destroyed them both. Terrence's body was claimed by a distant aunt, buried in a pauper's grave at Woodmere Cemetery on Detroit's east side. No headstone, no marker, just a plot number in a database. Marcus requested permission to attend the funeral, was denied due to security concerns. The Linwood crew's territory was absorbed by larger operations within months of the brothers' arrest. The corners they'd controlled, the customers they'd served, the money they'd made, it all continued under different management, different names, same product, same violence, same cycles that had been running in Detroit since the crack epidemic began. The house on Chalmers Street where they'd kept their stash was raided by DEA agents 2 days after the brothers' surrender, everything seized, the place condemned, and eventually torn down in 2003. Marcus's apartment on Tyerman Avenue was sold at auction to pay legal fees and restitution, bought by an investor who rented it to Section 8 tenants who knew nothing of its history. Terrence's studio on Mack Avenue was emptied by landlords who threw away everything he'd owned, clothes and photographs and the comic books he'd collected since childhood. All of it in a dumpster, all of it gone. The Washington family name became synonymous with the Valentine's Day Massacre in Detroit's collective memory, a cautionary tale about loyalty taken too far, about codes that demanded blood, about what happens when protecting what's yours means destroying everything else. Raymond Collins's children grew up without their father, raised by Sandra, who worked 3 jobs to keep them fed and housed. Raymond Jr. never went to college like his father had hoped, worked in an auto parts factory until it closed, struggled with addiction issues throughout his 20s, before finally getting clean in his 30s. Michael dropped out of high school, spent 5 years in prison for armed robbery, came out determined to break the cycle, became a youth counselor working with at-risk kids on Detroit's east side. Tanisha finished high school, attended community college, became a social worker, dedicated her career to helping children affected by violence, turned her father's death into motivation to prevent other kids from experiencing what she'd experienced. Sandra remarried in 2001, found happiness with a retired auto worker who treated her children as his own, lived until 2019 when cancer took her at 63 years old. She never spoke publicly about the Valentine's Day Massacre, never did interviews despite dozens of requests from journalists and true crime writers. She kept her grief private, kept her trauma personal, refused to let what had happened define her entirely. The other 13 victims' families scattered across Detroit and beyond, each dealing with grief in their own ways. Some moved away, left the city entirely, tried to start over in places where nobody knew their history. Some stayed, raised children in the same neighborhoods where their relatives had died, taught those children about forgiveness and moving forward, while carrying rage that never quite faded. Some turned to activism, working with community organizations, trying to reduce violence, giving speeches at schools and churches about the cost of street life, using their pain to try to prevent others from feeling similar pain. And some just disappeared into addiction or depression or the kind of quiet desperation that looks like normal life from the outside, but is really just survival, breathing, and existing without ever really living again. 14 families destroyed. Dozens of children growing up without fathers or uncles or brothers. Hundreds of people impacted by violence that stemmed from $45,000 and 2 kilos of cocaine and a betrayal between friends that could have been resolved dozens of ways that didn't involve massacre. Marcus Washington died in prison on January 14th, 2023, at age 61 from complications related to diabetes and heart disease. He'd served 34 years of his life sentence, seen parole boards deny him release 6 times, maintained until the end that he'd do it again, that protecting his legacy had been worth the cost, even though the cost was everything. His body was claimed by Keisha's second husband, a gesture of unexpected compassion, buried at Woodmere Cemetery 3 plots away from Terrence. Brothers, reunited in death after being separated for 26 years. Only 4 people attended the funeral. Keisha's husband, a prison chaplain who'd become Marcus's friend during the final years, a cousin from his mother's side who barely remembered him, and a reporter writing a book about the Valentine's Day Massacre. No flowers, no speeches, no closure, just a box in the ground, and another name added to Detroit's endless list of violent deaths. 35 years have passed since that February. In 1989, when 2 brothers decided loyalty demanded blood and protection required massacre. Detroit hasn't healed because Detroit can't heal, because the conditions that created the Washington brothers still exist in different forms with different names, but the same fundamental dynamics: economic collapse, lack of opportunity, survival through illegal means, codes that value honor over life, systems that fail people until people create their own systems that fail everyone eventually. The cycle continues, the violence continues. Young men continue to make choices that seem necessary in the moment but destroy them over time. Families continue to grieve. And Detroit continues to be Detroit. Beautiful and broken, resilient and damaged. A city that contains multitudes, including the capacity for both extraordinary kindness and extraordinary violence, sometimes from the same people. The Valentine's Day Massacre is largely forgotten now, except by those who lived through it, those who lost family, those who remember Detroit in the late 80s when crack cocaine was destroying neighborhoods and brothers were killing over territory and respect. There's no memorial, no plaque, No historical marker explaining what happened and why. The locations where people died have changed ownership multiple times. New residents sleep in bedrooms where blood was spilled. Children play in yards where men took their last breaths. Life continues on ground soaked with violence. The story exists in court records and newspaper archives and old people's memories, fading slowly like everything fades, becoming legend rather than history, becoming a cautionary tale rather than a specific set of events with names and dates and consequences. But for those who remember, who were there, who felt the impact directly, the questions remain unanswered and probably unanswerable. Was Marcus Washington a murderer who deserved life in prison? Yes, he killed 14 people with premeditation and planning, crossed every moral and legal boundary that exists to prevent such violence. Was he a desperate man, trying to protect the only thing of value he'd built in a world that had taken everything else? Also, yes, he was following codes his father had taught him, protecting loyalty and honor in the only way he knew how. Both things are true simultaneously, and that uncomfortable duality is what makes the story so disturbing, because it forces us to confront questions we'd rather avoid. What would we do if betrayed by someone we'd trusted for a decade? How far would we go to protect what we'd built? Does justice exist when legal systems can't protect the things that matter most to people operating outside those systems? The Washington brothers crossed boundaries no human beings should cross, but those boundaries existed in a world where the usual rules didn't apply, where loyalty mattered more than law, where reputation meant survival, where showing weakness meant death. There's no redemption in this story, no moment where right triumphs and wrong is punished in ways that feel satisfying, just a brutal truth that violence breeds more violence, that broken systems create their own monsters, that sometimes the line between protecting what's yours and becoming what you fear disappears entirely. If this story made you think about loyalty, betrayal, and the price we pay when desperation meets code, leave your like and share this video. Subscribe to this channel for more true stories that challenge what we think we know about right and wrong, about honor and violence, about how ordinary people become capable of extraordinary darkness when systems fail and old codes demand blood. Comment below. Where do you draw the line between protecting what's yours and losing your humanity? What would you have done in Marcus Washington's position? Because these stories aren't just history, they're happening right now somewhere. Different names, same impossible choices, same desperate circumstances, same human capacity for both loyalty and destruction. Until next time, remember that the monsters we fear aren't always born that way. Sometimes they're made one betrayal, one broken code, one desperate decision at a time. And the line between justice and vengeance is drawn not in law books, but in the human heart where it's always been thinnest, always been easiest to cross, always been hardest to find our way back from.